She never played by anyone's rules. She wrapped herself in chiffon, stepped into the spotlight, and rewrote what a woman in rock could be. These 7 albums showed Stevie Nicks exactly who she was meant to become. 7. Buffalo Springfield Again. Some songs arrive like a quiet suggestion. This one arrived like a prophecy. Stevie Nicks was still a teenager when she first heard Rock and Roll Woman drifting through a radio, and something inside her stood completely still. The lyrics described a woman coming, singing soft and low, moving through the world on her own terms. Nicks did not hear a song about someone else. She heard a song about herself before she had even become that person yet.
These are those songs that were all supposed to be on records somewhere between 85 and, 1990, really. And just for what...
Buffalo Springfield Again was the album that told her the future was possible. Not just possible, inevitable. The harmonies were rich and layered, the songwriting restless and searching, the whole record carrying the particular electricity of the San Francisco scene at its most alive.
You're strange, but don't change, and I let her.
Neil Young, Stephen Stills, and Richie Furay were 3 writers pulling in different directions, and the tension between them gave the album a nervous, urgent energy that never quite settled. Nicks kept this record on her pre-show playlist for decades. Right before walking on stage, she would put on Rock and Roll Woman and let it remind her of the girl who had first heard it and decided nothing would stop her. That is a remarkable thing. Not just that a song inspired her once, at the beginning, but she returned to it again and again throughout her entire career, using it as a compass every single time the stage lights came up. 6. Led Zeppelin IV. There are bands you admire and bands that get inside your blood. Led Zeppelin got inside Stevie Nicks' blood and never left. Growing up in California during the peak of the rock revolution, she absorbed everything the British giants put into the world. But Led Zeppelin IV hit differently from everything else around it.
What I learned from them, their phrasing, the way they wrote poetry, the way they put their poetry to music.
It did not ask for your attention politely. It claimed it with absolute authority and dared you to look away. Black Dog, Rock and Roll, When the Levee Breaks, Stairway to Heaven. These tracks did not exist in any conventional category. They moved between delicacy and devastation without warning, shifting from acoustic gentleness to thunderous noise within the same song. Jimmy Page built guitar parts that felt ancient and futuristic simultaneously. Robert Plant's voice climbed to places that seemed physically impossible. John Bonham hit his drums like he was settling a personal argument with the entire universe. What Nicks absorbed from this record was permission to be enormous, permission to take up space, to be loud and soft and theatrical and raw all at once without apologizing for any of it. The gothic atmosphere of Led Zeppelin IV, the mystery, the mythology, the sense that something larger than ordinary life was happening inside these songs, fed directly into the world Nicks was already building in her own imagination. She even covered rock and roll live, putting it on her greatest hits collection as a deliberate act of tribute, some debts you spend your whole career paying back. This was one of them. 5. Surrealistic Pillow. Picture San Francisco in 1967. The air is thick with possibility. A teenage Stevie Nicks newly arrived in the city, standing right at the center of the most explosive cultural moment in American history. Jefferson Airplanes were not just a band at that moment. They were the sound of an entire generation deciding it was done with the old rules. And Grace Slick was standing at the front of it all, commanding every room she entered with a ferocity and elegance that nobody in rock had quite managed before.
It was a moment. It was spectacular.
Somebody to Love, White Rabbit. These were not gentle invitations, they were demands. Slick sang with the kind of authority that stopped conversations and turned heads. She did not perform from behind her femininity. She performed through sheer force of will, voice, and presence. Slick proved that a woman could own a stage without softening herself for anyone in the audience or the industry surrounding her. Nicks watched and filed everything away. Years later, she would name Grace Slick alongside Janis Joplin and Jimi Hendrix as the three artists she most directly emulated when performing. That is a significant trinity. Two of them had already changed the sound of rock forever. Slick was the one who showed Nicks specifically what female power looked like when it refused to shrink. The chiffon and the spinning and the commanding stillness, all of it carries Slick's fingerprints. The Surrealistic Pillow was the blueprint. Nicks spent 50 years building on top of it.
4. Are you experienced? Before the chiffon, before Rhiannon, before any of it, there was a young Stevie Nicks standing in a club watching Jimi Hendrix perform, her band Fritz opening the show, her entire understanding of what music could physically be in the process of getting permanently dismantled. She had heard records before, she had played on stages before, but nothing had prepared her for what happened when Hendrix plugged in, and the room stopped being a room and became something else entirely.
I say studied, and I guess that really is what I did. I studied.
Are You Experienced arrived in 1967 and immediately made the existing rules of rock guitar feel like suggestions written in pencil. Purple Haze, Foxy Lady, The Wind Cries Mary. Each track sounded like it had been transmitted from somewhere just outside the reach of ordinary human experience. Hendrix did not play his instruments so much as inhabit it completely, bending sound into shapes that had no names yet, and filling every available space with feeling that bypassed rational thought and landed somewhere deeper. What stayed with Nicks was not the technical brilliance, extraordinary as it was a total physical commitment. Hendrix held nothing back. Every performance was complete surrender to whatever the music needed from him at that moment. Nothing calculated, nothing managed from a safe distance, just a human being in an electric guitar having a conversation that the rest of the world was lucky enough to overhear. Nicks carried that standard of total commitment onto every stage she ever walked onto. The debt was enormous, and she never pretended otherwise. 3. Pearl. Let's start with what Stevie Nicks actually owned. A strand of Janis Joplin's stage beads. Not a poster, not a record. A physical object that had been on Joplin's body while she performed. Nicks kept it. That single detail tells you more about the depth of this influence than any critical analysis ever could. This was not admiration from a distance. This was devotion carried close to the skin. Pearl was Joplin's final album, released after her death in 1970, and it remains the most complete portrait of what she could do when everything aligned. Me and Bobby McGee, Crybaby, Get It While You Can. These tracks moved through grief and joy and hunger and loss with a rawness that made every polished vocal performance by anyone else sound slightly dishonest by comparison. Joplin did not protect herself behind technique. She sang from the wound every single time, and the wound was always real and always open. Nicks had opened for Joplin with Fritz before any of this fame existed. She watched from the side stage as this small, seemingly ordinary woman walked out and transformed herself into something beyond description. The crowd did not just respond to Joplin, they surrendered to her completely. And in that hour and a half, watching how Joplin paced herself, how she read the room, how she gave everything and somehow found more to give, Nicks received the most important masterclass of her entire career. She said it herself plainly. She learned more from watching Janis Joplin perform for 90 minutes than from any other experience in her life. Pearl is the recorded version of that lesson. proof that total honesty, delivered without armor, was the most powerful force in rock and roll. Nicks never forgot it. You can hear it in every performance she ever gave. 2. Blue. There's a version of this story where Stevie Nicks gives up, where the exhaustion of waitressing and cleaning and playing small shows finally wins, where she listens to her parents, goes back to school, and the woman who would become one of rock's greatest figures quietly disappears into an ordinary life. That version did not happen. And one of the reasons it did not happen was Joni Mitchell. Blue arrived in 1971 and did something that very few records have ever managed before or since. It made vulnerability feel like the strongest possible position a person could occupy.
Keep thinking you can make it through these waves. Acid boot.
All I Want, River, The Last Time I Saw Richard, Case of You. These were not songs built around hooks or production tricks or commercial strategy. They were confessions so precise and so honest that listening to them felt like reading someone's private letters by candlelight. Mitchell had stripped everything away, and what remained was pure feeling, delivered with a voice and a guitar that seemed to exist in their own separate atmosphere. Nicks was living through her hardest years when Mitchell became her compass. Broke, uncertain, watching her relationship with Lindsey Buckingham fracture in real time, working jobs that had nothing to do with the future she was certain was waiting for her somewhere. In those rooms, in those silences, Joni Mitchell's voice was company and instruction simultaneously. It told her that the pain was not something to hide, that the most personal material was also the most universal. That a woman could sit down at an instrument and tell the complete truth about her interior life, and the world would not look away, it would lean closer. What Nicks ultimately took from Blue was a standard of emotional courage that she applied to every song she ever wrote. The willingness to name the real thing, to not soften the edges or dress the wound up in comfortable language. Rhiannon, Landslide, Gold Dust Woman, all of them carry Mitchell's fingerprints, even when the sound is completely different. Blue proved that the most fragile and the most powerful could be exactly the same thing. Nicks built her entire songwriting philosophy on that single idea. 1. Court and Spark. She lay on the floor and listened to it for 3 days straight. That is not a metaphor. That is exactly what Stevie Nicks did when Court and Spark arrived in 1974. Everything around her was falling apart simultaneously. The Buckingham Nicks album had been dropped by Polydor. The relationship with Lindsey was crumbling. She was cleaning other people's houses, waiting tables, wondering quietly whether the life she had always been certain was coming would ever actually arrive. And in the middle of all that uncertainty, Joni Mitchell released the most fully realized album of her career, and Nicks pressed play and did not move for 72 hours. Court and Spark was different from Blue in a specific and important way. Where Blue was raw and exposed, and sometimes barely held together, Court and Spark were confident. Mitchell had taken all that same emotional depth and wrapped it in jazz-inflected arrangements, orchestral flourishes, and a production sophistication that made it feel simultaneously intimate and cinematic. Help Me, The Same Situation, Free Man in Paris, Down to You. These were songs written by a woman who had been inside the music industry long enough to understand exactly what it asked of you and exactly what it took in return. She wrote about fame and longing and the particular loneliness of being surrounded by people who want something from you, rather than simply wanting you. Nicks recognized every word. She was standing at the beginning of the journey Mitchell was describing from the middle of it. The music business sharks at the parties, the way people looked at a young blonde woman and saw a commodity rather than an artist, the tension between needing love and needing freedom, and never quite being able to hold both at the same time. Mitchell had mapped the territory Nicks was about to enter, written the field notes, and left them behind for whoever came next. That is what made this album untouchable above all others. Not just the beauty of it, not just the craft, but the specific, generous, unsparing honesty of a woman who had survived the thing Nicks was terrified of and came out the other side still standing, still writing, still refusing to be anything less than completely herself. Nicks pressed play again. The floor was cold. It did not matter. Some education you receive sitting in a classroom. This one arrived lying flat on the ground, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of your future being described by someone who had already lived it. 7 albums, 7 different ways of becoming who you were always meant to be. Stevie Nicks listened, learned, and built something nobody could copy. If these stories moved you, subscribe and stay close. The music never stops.